Introduction. Leadership is not about the title on your door. Micro MBA reveals what it is about. We will focus on what it says about culture and organizational. Stay with me, the best part is near the end. Overall summary. The actual experience of organizational culture is termed organizational climate. When organizational culture needs to change sometimes, the espoused organizational culture is not reflected in the organizational climate. The influence of organizational and national culture on new product performance. Corporate culture and organizational symbolism, an overview. Perspectives on organizational climate and culture. Applicant personality, organizational culture, and organization attraction. Institutional processes of organizational culture. National culture has a profound impact on organizational culture because the organization's founders usually belong to that culture. Chapter 1, Culture and Organizational. 1. Organizational culture, forces that shape thinking, behavior, and success. Artifacts, visible organizational structures and processes. Espoused beliefs, underlying philosophies and justifications. Enacted values and organizational climate. When organizational culture needs to change. Interventions in organizational culture. 2. Corporate social responsibility reporting and sustainability. Brief overview of historical development of CSR reporting. To whom does one report on CSR and sustainability? This chapter considers the most powerful and decisive aspect of people performance in organizations, organizational culture. The chapter explores the meaning of organizational culture and how culture informs organizational members of the root assumptions, values, and behaviors that constitute the organization's raison d'être, vision, and future. It considers how cultures evolve within organizations, the pivotal role played by their founding members, and how organizational leadership can change culture, reshaping and refocusing it to contribute to the organization's continuing survival and success. Culture is an abstraction, yet the forces that are created in social and organizational situations that derive from culture are powerful. This chapter explores organizational culture by providing a critical working knowledge of the topic. Organizational culture is a significant aspect of all social aggregations, project teams, work groups, and corporate organizations. An awareness of organizational culture is of critical importance for those who work in, or collaborate with, such groups. This importance is reflected in the simple definition of organizational culture offered by Schneider, who claims that organizational culture is the way we do things to succeed. 13 p. Section provides a broad review of culture at the levels of metaphor and national phenomenon. Section considers culture as an organizational reality, while section explores the structure and nested layers of culture in organizational contexts. Section examines organizational culture as an espoused value system and organizational climate that is the experienced culture projected and confirmed by organizational processes, policies, and procedures. Section 1.6 considers the role of leadership in organizational culture, including the role played by an organization's founding leaders, mechanisms for perpetuating culture, and the processes through which present leaders can shift and realign culture. Indeed, it might be said that the acculturated organizational participant is the one who self-identifies with the organization, behaves according to its norms, subscribes to its assumptions and values, and yet remains oblivious to the presence, power, or even existence of the organization's underlying culture. The central theme of this chapter is organizational culture. However, it is important to consider the other culture systems within which an organization and its culture are embedded because, to a great extent, cultures do not exist independently or uniquely but are nested in and moderated by one another. Culture as a process and as an outcome is connected with growing, nurturing, supporting, and caring. In this older sense, culture is associated with an exclusive high culture as seen in intellectual development, aesthetic refinement, and civilized behavior. Here, culture is regarded as the exclusive domain or preoccupation of an elite social class, and culture differentiates between higher and lower social classes. Culture as a common social experience, in the second sense used in this chapter and in organizational culture studies, culture is understood in a less restricted sense and is associated with growing up within a specific context, or with developing within a common social environment. Culture, consciously recognized or unrecognized experience, is encountered by everyone and shapes everyone. National culture is a subject of interest and study in its own right, but it is important to appreciate the extent to which national cultural dimensions are expressed in organizations. 19. The key figure in the analysis and measurement of national culture is Gert Hofstede, 2021, and his major contribution Culture's Consequences focuses on the widely held national values that contribute to comparative managerial differences. Hofstede's work attempts to identify, define, and measure quantifiable dimensions of national culture. Chapter 2: Organizational and Culture. Organizational culture can be seen as being nested in a broader national culture, and the relative strength, influence, and expression of each culture system can sometimes become a matter of practical concern, then of academic interest. 31. From a practical perspective, relative cultural strength and possible culture conflict between national and organizational cultural perspectives is usually not important. At any given moment, organizational culture can appear static and stable. Artifacts, visible organizational structures and processes. The most obvious manifestations of organizational culture are to be seen in the physical world that the organization creates for itself. Of course, the projection of the organization's culture into the physical world is moderated by a design purpose, a functionality that might itself be embedded in, or connected to, organizational culture. Espoused beliefs and values. Publicly projected organizational beliefs are directed to external audiences, but these narratives are also known to organizational participants. However, this is not the normal way through which organizational members understand the organization's culture. For organizational members and for organizational novices, the internal sharing of espoused values is the primary way through which culture is instilled. Through that process, organizational culture represents what the organization believes about itself, how it believes that it should act, and how its internal constituent members believe they should approach their organizational roles and actions. Underpinning these espoused values are older and deeper ones that represent the core of the organization's culture. They include the purpose of the organization, the meaning of organizational participation, and the social identity of the organization and its members. Enacted values and organizational climate. One of the challenges in understanding organizational culture is that it can be regarded simultaneously as a description and an experience. As a description, organizational culture can be portrayed through its artifacts, espoused beliefs, and underpinning basic assumptions. Static descriptions of culture as rhetoric or culture as proclaimed often differ significantly from culture as experienced by organizational members. 58. Organizational members can often be conflicted between competing versions of values as proclaimed and values as enacted. One way of exploring organizational culture is through discussions with those who work in the organization. Indeed, this is the only way in which the deeper and more hidden aspects of culture can be revealed. Organizational climate is an expression of the personal, subjective, and experiential understanding of organizational culture that is collectively arrived at by organizational members as they engage with the organization and implement its various policies and practices. This is organizational culture, and it incorporates the assumptions, beliefs, and values that are recognized as important, especially by the leadership of the organization. B. The internal shared meanings and perceptions that organizational participants have about the organizational entity and their relatedness to it. Organizational culture is a perpetual work in process that is continuously being reshaped and re-expressed in a process of evolution and adaptation. The creation and perpetuation of a strong culture can result in a powerful and effective organization, but that does not necessarily mean that a strong culture will ensure the continuing growth and relevance of the organization. Solving the culture problem early in its life is a prerequisite for the organization's survival. Organizational cultures are not created at the time of the company's founding, they are replicated and perpetuated in subsequent generations of organizational participants. Through these processes, incoming and existing organizational participants are gradually brought together and coalesce around the organization's espoused culture. 71-74. Chapter 3: Culture and Organizational. These mechanisms are undoubtedly effective in accomplishing the explicit goals of perpetuating organizational culture. Sometimes, the espoused culture ceases to provide the organization with any competitive advantage in a changed external environment. However, a rhetorical declaration does not create an organizational culture, any more than wishful thinking can transform the organizational climate. The misalignment of organizational culture and organizational climate is not an academic issue. It can lead to an erosion of participant loyalty, commitment, and identity. A failure to align organizational culture and organizational climate can result in reputational damage that endangers the viability of the firm in a competitive world. These outcomes are not produced by organizational culture or organizational climate, they are the outcome of both. Both organizational culture and climate need to be understood. Change interventions in organizational culture. In most cases, organizational change management is organizational culture management and is initiated by the organization's senior leadership. Changing organizational culture is accomplished by strategic leaders, who usually possess a transformative or a visionary agenda. 82-85. Unfreezing prevalent culture. Here, the leader facilitates an organization-wide critical review of the existing culture. Refreezing changed culture. This final phase allows the new values and beliefs that have been promoted to become permanent fixtures in the altered landscape of organizational culture. The permanence of the altered culture must be acknowledged by senior leadership, but more importantly, the new established culture system must be clear to all organizational members. It may help the reader to become more sensitive to the organizational forces, challenges, and opportunities connected with organizational culture and to apply that sensitivity to other business and management situations. Organizational culture may be an interesting academic study, but it has little value or practical application for the manager. Since most organizations are embedded in a defined nation-state, the culture that develops in an organization more or less mirrors the surrounding national culture. A clear understanding of underlying culture can be gained by analyzing the visible artifacts and observable structures and processes of the organization. The deeper assumptions and values of organizational culture, which might also be referred to as shared tacit assumptions, are relatively fluid and easily changed. Organizational climate is the formal statement of how the organization describes its key assumptions, beliefs, and values. Organizational culture and organizational climate are two important aspects of the organization, but in most cases they are the same thing. Organizational culture comes into being in a random and serendipitous manner, usually without any clear point of origin. Organizational culture is transmitted through a process of internal socialization and through selective recruitment and hiring practices that attract and retain individuals who will most likely identify with the culture. In almost every case when there is a need for a change in organizational culture, the recognition comes too late and the necessary change cannot be initiated. Organizational culture and leadership, 3rd ed. Chapter 4: Culture and Organizational. Culturally speaking, culture, communication and politeness theory, 2nd ed. Culture's consequences, international differences in work-related values. Culture-S consequences, comparing values, behaviors, institutions, and organizations across nations. The moderating effects of national culture on the development of organizational learning culture, a multilevel study across 7 countries. Are national and organizational cultures isomorphic? Organizational culture, market orientation, innovativeness, and firm performance, an international research odyssey. A review of culture and information systems research, toward a theory of information technology culture conflict. Organizational culture and innovation, a meta-analytic review. Diagnosing and changing organizational culture, based on the competing values framework. Building organizational culture that stimulates creativity and innovation. Studying the links between organizational culture, innovation, and performance in Spanish companies. Physical space, culture and organizational creativity, a longitudinal study. Organizational learning and physical space, how office configurations inform organizational behavior. Organizational rituals, features, functions, and mechanisms. Unpacking workplace rituals as mechanisms for strong organizational culture. Symbols in organizational culture. In Ashkenazi N., Wildrom C., Peterson M., eds., Handbook of Organizational Culture and Climate, pages. APA Handbook of Industrial and Organizational Psychology, Volume Organizational Identification versus Organizational Commitment, Self-Definition, Social Exchange, and Job Attitudes. The Impact of Organizational Culture on Attraction and Recruitment of Job Applicants. Employees' responses to the mismatch between organizations' espoused values and basic assumptions about organizational culture. Opinions, all about culture. Organizational culture, mapping the terrain. Chapter 5, Organizational and Culture. Espoused organizational values, vision, and corporate social responsibility, does it matter to organizational members? Does congruence between espoused and enacted organizational values predict effective commitment in Australian organizations? Organizational climate and culture. Sense and nonsense about culture and climate. Gender inequalities in the workplace, the effects of organizational structures, processes, practices, and decision-makers' sexism. The Iron Cage Revisited, Institutional Isomorphism and Collective Rationality in Organizational Fields. Managing Corporate Culture Through Reward Systems. Organizational Cultural Perpetuation, a case study of an English Premier League football club. The Impact of Organizational Climate on Safety, Climate and Individual Behavior. Organizational Climate and Culture, Reflections on the History of the Constructs in the Journal of Applied Psychology. Organizational Change and Development. Culture Change at Genentech, Accelerating Strategic and Financial Accomplishments. Leading by Leveraging Culture. Why Hospitals Don't Learn from Failures, Organizational and Psychological Dynamics that Inhibit System Change. An understanding of culture helps people perform successfully and advance their careers. A deeper appreciation of culture is also essential for managers who wish to change how the organization operates and to resolve problems of internal integration and external adaptation in an ever-changing social and economic world. In multinational settings, there is often a conflict between the national culture of organizational members, in different foreign units, and the organizational culture, domestic headquarters. Organizational culture experienced in foreign units is moderated by national perspectives. It is true that considerable insight into organizational culture can be gained by considering its artifacts and visible structures and processes. The shared tacit assumptions constitute the underpinning values and beliefs of the organization's culture system. Espoused culture is how the organization describes its fundamental assumptions, beliefs, and values. Many organizational members, especially senior management, may genuinely believe that this culture permeates the whole organization and is understood and acted upon by everyone. Organizational climate, however, is the understanding of the fundamental values that those inside the organization. Closing. That is the heart of Micro MBA. If it helped, a quick subscribe keeps more summaries coming. So how do culture and organizational connect? That is exactly where we started. Go back to the top and watch it click into place.